This series deals with controversial issues. The following program contains language and images that may not be suitable for all audiences. Viewer discretion is advised.
Hello, everyone. My name is Brad Taylor. I'm the Associate Director of the Museum Studies program here at the University of Michigan. It's with great pleasure that I welcome you to the final presentation of our Winter 2007 colloquium called Exhibiting Controversy from Maplethorpe to Body Worlds and Beyond. This colloquium, dedicated to the provocative theme of museums and controversy, has covered topics ranging from the ethics of displaying human anatomical specimens to the creation of a memorial museum at Ground Zero in New York City. This afternoon, we're pleased to welcome Dr. David Pilgrim from Ferris State University, who will speak to us about the collection and display of racist artifacts at the Jim Crow Museum of Racist Memorabilia in Big Rapids, Michigan. Dr. Pilgrim is an applied sociologist with a doctorate from Ohio State University and is an expert on issues relating to multiculturalism, diversity, and race relations. In addition to his teaching and curatorial duties at Ferris State, he's also a consultant to the Public Museum of Grand Rapids Ethnic History exhibit and was recently elected to the Michigan Museums Association Board of Directors. I should also mention here that Dr. Pilgrim has recently been named as Chief Diversity Officer for Ferris State University, in addition to his teaching, research, and curatorial responsibilities. Dr. Pilgrim is best known as the founder and curator of the Jim Crow Museum, a collection of over 5,000 racist artifacts located now at Ferris State University. Using objects of intolerance to teach tolerance, Dr. Pilgrim believes that racism can be objectively studied and creatively confronted. In 2004, he co-produced the documentary Jim Crow's Museum to explain his unique approach to combating racism. The film won several awards, including Best Documentary at the 2004 Flint Film Festival, and is shown nationally on PBS. In 2004, Dr. Pilgrim co-created a traveling exhibition that takes the Jim Crow Museum's lessons to a national audience. Hateful Things is a 39-unit traveling exhibition of objects found in the Jim Crow Museum. The objects are accompanied by didactic panels that place the images within their proper historical context. In 2005, Dr. Pilgrim was involved in the creation of a second traveling exhibition. Them, Images of Separation, is a 35-unit exhibition that deals with the stereotyping of women, poor whites, gays, Jewish Americans, Native Americans, Mexican Americans, African Americans, and Asian Americans, among others. Though still actively involved with the Jim Crow Museum, Dr. Pilgrim has also begun collecting objects that tell the story of the belittlement and defamation of women. It is Dr. Pilgrim's goal that these objects be housed in the Sarah Bartman Room, a room named after the South African woman who was objectified, displayed, and brutally exploited as an exotic curiosity in England and France at the beginning of the 19th century. According to Dr. Pilgrim, her victimization was a perfect illustration of the links that exist between racism, sexism, and imperialism. This new space, modeled on the Jim Crow Museum, will use sexist objects to teach Americans to better understand sexism. Several of us here at the university had the opportunity to visit the Jim Crow Museum last summer. It was an extremely engaging, compelling experience. A frequent solution for dealing with controversial issues is to attempt to squelch or neutralize them. In the case of hateful things, racist or sexist memorabilia, most folks would recommend that they simply be destroyed. But David Pilgrim thinks otherwise. He has created a new context for these horrible objects, transforming them into powerful agents for confronting racism and sexism, for teaching tolerance. A dedicated educator, Dr. Pilgrim is a Ferris State University dedicated teacher. As a teacher, curator, and public speaker, David Pilgrim challenges audiences to think deeply about diversity and race relations. We're especially pleased to be welcoming here to Ann Arbor today. Please join me in warmly welcoming Dr. David Pilgrim to the University of Michigan.
Brad, that was a wonderful introduction. I often wonder what people are going to say about me when I'm dead. And if that's a good taste of it, boy, that makes me feel good. And I told Brad that I was going to come here and tell some anti-Michigan jokes, and he said that would not be appropriate. My daughter said that would be appropriate. I won't do that. Actually, well, maybe we'll see how it goes. By the way, when you deal with material that I deal with, you have to have a good sense of humor, and so I joke a lot. As Chief Diversity Officer for the university, I've learned that you have to be appropriate with those jokes. But just so that you and I are on the same page, if I joke during the next hour or so, I'll make this sign with my hand. That way you'll know that I'm joking. Let's see, get a couple other things. If you have a comment or a question, just raise your hands. You don't have to treat me, we don't want to turn this into the situation like with Michael Richards, where someone's heckling me from the audience. But if you have a comment or a question, I don't want you to save it up. One of the things we teach people at the Jim Crow Museum is to not self-censor. What we are right now in the United States is a place where many white Americans are afraid to talk about race for fear that they're going to say something that sounds racist or racially insensitive. Many black people, brown people, red and yellow people believe that a discussion about race may lead to them getting angry. And so what happens is we don't talk about race. Well, I'll take that back. We talk about it, but not in places where our ideas can be challenged. We talk about it in restrooms, in corridors, in our personal living rooms and the like. So at the Jim Crow Museum, one of the first things we have to do is to teach people how to talk about race, how to say all the things that the rest of the culture is telling you not to say. So again, I want you to talk to me, and I don't want you to worry about saying something that you think may offend me or may offend the topic. If you look here, you'll see a quote from Stetson Kennedy. How many of you have heard of Stetson Kennedy? Anybody? Stetson Kennedy was a white American. He was a historian, passed away in the last decade, I think. Spent his time in a really satirical way critiquing Jim Crow. Had a wicked sense of humor, and wrote a book called The Jim Crow Guide, where he made fun, made sport, made light of Jim Crow segregation. The quote that he said in there, I'm sure he didn't mean it for me, but when I read it, I thought to myself, wow, well, that's what I've done. Many Americans, right after Jim Crow, started destroying the objects. They took those white-only signs and colored-only signs, and they started destroying them. That's not what he did, though. He ran around digging in people's dumpsters and collecting that material because, as he claims, he thought one day he would create a museum of horrors. Well, much to my horror, I kind of had an epiphany when I read that, and I thought, wow, I've created a museum of horrors. I think the difference is that I believe and know to be true that you can take objects of intolerance and teach people to think deeply about race. I know it because I've seen it happen hundreds, maybe even thousands of times. And the only thing I can compare it to, when I was at the Ohio State University, the finest college in America. That's all I'm going to say. I'm going to let it go right there. Now, I tell you what, my children are thinking about coming to Michigan, and like many children, they disappoint their parents. And I'll stop that. I got that out of my system. Well, it's not out of my system, but anyway. When I was at The Ohio State University, my master's thesis was on people that are born with congenital malformations that are so severe that they elicit negative responses from others. People born with hanging tumors, people co-joined twins, just any range of people born physically different from the rest of us. And there was no name at the time, a kind of a collective name. And I came up with this word, this phrase, human oddities. And I think I'd heard it at a circus. And I'm a little bit off the subject, and I'll get back on. But I had a family member who was exhibited in circus sideshows, and she used that term, human oddities. And so I started using it. And when I went to The Ohio State, I wanted to do that research, and I would talk to professors in the gross anatomy program, and I kept trying to explain to them which category of people I wanted to research, and they just couldn't get it. And I kept using that term, human oddities, and now I realize that I wish I had used a different term. But anyway, one professor, he says, "I think I know what you mean." And he took me into a room, and I can't describe it other than to say that every possible known human physical variation was in that room. And it was a gross anatomy lab, and it blew my mind. And I said to him, "Why do you have a room like this?" And he said, "Well, we have a room like this because we need to study," and I'm using his language now, not mine, "we need to study when it went wrong." And I've thought a lot about that. Well, I make that parallel, even though now, as I've gotten older and more compassionate in my personal journey, I make that parallel because that's what I think the room that I've created and the museum that I'm building now is. It's a room where we can see what went wrong. So, actually, I can do this myself. It's a small room right now and a single room, probably not much bigger than this. We have been working with Exhibit Works out of Detroit. We have a space that is probably 6 or 7 or 8 times bigger than that being planned. I'm going to talk a little bit about that later. But you got to imagine, if you have, we can't show all the objects, but if you have 2,000 objects and you're in this small room, the docent can be talking to you, a lecturer could be talking to you, but those pieces are talking to you. And it is a powerful sledgehammer-like reaction. I think that's why sometimes people don't get it from the outside. I'm convinced that most people that come to the museum, and certainly the ones who give me an opportunity to explain what we're doing, they will get it. But when you see the title, Jim Crow Museum of Racist Memorabilia, and you hear this description of this place where there's just all these racist things, there is a tendency in some people to think, wow, that crazy guy just built this weird chamber of horrors, this shrine to racism. And that's not what it is. I'm not going to read, actually, I only have text on about 2 or 3 of these. I can't stand when lecturers, and I mean this is no disrespect to any of you that do this, but I can't stand people that I don't like it when people put PowerPoints with a lot of text on them and then read them to you. Basically, what I wanted to show you here was what we have on our website and what has been our mission. We want to educate, and it sounds corny, but we want to educate both the head and the heart. And I thought it was a really big deal when you get down to the bottom to be a part of the academy and actually have as one of your objectives to promote racial healing and understanding. I mean, that's the first piece is easy. You know, when you talk about academics, you expect to do that at a university, but I wanted to have a civil rights component, and it took a lot of discussion and debate at our university, and I said to them, well, this is why I collected it in the first place. And so that's up there. We are a learning lab. I originally created this facility for my students. I've been collecting racist artifacts my entire life. If you watch the documentary, you've heard that story. But I brought it to Ferris for my students. I kept telling students, listen, man, in the 1950s it was like this, and in the 1960s, and I realized at a certain point, not so much that they thought I was lying, they just thought I was engaging in hyperbole, that I'm exaggerating. It couldn't have been that bad. And so I started using this material as visual aids. And then as I got a chance to speak at more and more universities and public museums and the like, I would bring or take items with me and show them to people. And I tell you, you can look at an object in a book, but to hold it in your hand. And in those days, I didn't know anything about letting other people hold the material. And to let students and others see the actual artifact and hold it just made an incredible difference for people. So what started as just a facility for my students has now become sort of a national resource, but it will always be a learning laboratory. And you know who gave me that phrase was that gross anatomy professor at The Ohio State, when he said, that's why we have this room. It's a learning laboratory. We want to get people talking about race and racism. It doesn't have to be a racist object to be in there. You know, I don't know how many of you have a psychology background. I don't. I'm a sociologist. But one of the things I notice when people come into that room and they have all these 2,000 or however many pieces are being displayed, there is this psychological need to create some space. And one of the ways that people create space is by picking out the least offensive object they can find and saying, what's wrong with that? And it's usually a mammy piece, you know, an Aunt Jemima piece or something like that. And they'll say, well, there's nothing wrong with this. There's, you know, to digress again, by the way, I hope you can follow me. It's like a train, okay? And just bouncing around. Just do the best you can. I've never been in an American city where I looked for racist artifacts and did not find some. So, of course, in Ann Arbor, I went looking. And I found some. I went to a shop, it's a curiosity shop in town, and I found a lot of pieces. They wanted, the man there wanted more money than I wanted to give for those pieces. And that reminded me that what we have in the museum is not a sample of what I've seen with these brown eyes. It's a sample of what I could afford. Because I've seen a lot of pieces, a lot of great pieces. There was a piece called Chopped Up Niggas. And it was a puzzle. And that puzzle, I saw it 20 years ago for $3,000. And I had to make a decision where I could either buy 200 pieces or that one piece. So I obviously did not buy that one piece. So sometimes people look at a piece like this and they'll say, well, there's nothing wrong with that. It's what they're creating psychological distance. For us, it doesn't have to be in and of itself racist. It just has to lead us to good discussions about race. And I'm not going to give you the whole history of the minstrel show. Everybody knows the history of the minstrel shows, right? I think the most fascinating thing about the minstrel shows is first you had many European Americans, especially Italian Americans and Jewish Americans, pretending on stage to be African Americans. But then later, once African Americans were allowed on stage, you had African Americans pretending to be Jewish Americans and pretending to be African, and Irish Americans pretending to be African Americans. That's deep. That is too deep. Do they say deep at the University of Michigan? Yeah, Aunt Jemima. So we have objects like this. I just wanted to show you some of the imagery so you can kind of have a feel for what we have. This is the famous Coon Chicken Inn, Porter. The Coon Chicken Inns were three. They were a chain of restaurants. I've only counted three, but somebody just told me there were four. That there were three: Seattle, Washington, Spokane, Washington, and Salt Lake City. And they were a chain of restaurants. And the head was so big of the porter that his mouth was the door to the place. Anyway, this is a cookie jar. That's a brand new cookie jar. I made a lot of mistakes, and I'm willing to talk to you about them. Actually, I was going to turn this presentation into just a litany of my mistakes because I thought people could benefit from that. But one of the mistakes I made was calling it the Jim Crow Museum. And the reason I say that is because in some people's minds, that limits us. Then they come in there, they think, oh, this is just material from the late 1870s to the mid 1960s, and you shouldn't have anything else in here. And it also is, in many people's minds, another way to create space, because what they say is that this is all just stuff from the past. And one of the things that I did do always was to keep collecting new objects. So this is a new object. You probably don't remember LBJ's famous slogan, "Go all the way with LBJ." This right here, by the way, in case you can't tell what that is a license plate. All the objects in the Jim Crow Museum are everyday objects. And the reason we collected everyday objects was so that people could realize how deeply rooted in our culture ideas about race were. So that's a license plate. Now, I don't allow children in there. This has been an ongoing debate. I have an advantage that most, or had the advantage, I'm losing it as we become a more traditional museum. But early on, John Thorpe and I, who's the director, we just made all the decisions. And I have an advisory board member here, so I probably shouldn't say that out loud. But we made most of these kind of decisions. And I just told John, I don't want small children in here because there are things in here that I don't want them to see. And of course, the debate is, well, you say you want to create a place that teaches people to talk openly and honestly about race, but then you don't want children in there. Well, that's a misunderstanding. I believe that all Americans should talk about race. It's not something that we get done talking about. It's something we should talk about all the time and talk about it in new and different ways. But I don't think children need to have that as an early part in their journey. Does that make sense? I should be like number 16 on that list, not number 1. And we encourage visitors to watch either the documentary we created or the documentary that was created by Marlon Riggs called Ethnic Notions. How many of you have seen Ethnic Notions? Also, we try not to have individuals in there, but instead to structure it so that there's always groups. Why? Because we want constant discussion. We want discussion before people come. We want discussion while they're there. We want discussions after they leave. And of course, it's been easy so far because we're at a university. Once we move into a new facility and you get people showing up demanding to go in, it gets a little harder to keep that structure. There must be a docent at all time, no windows, and no photographing of objects. And of course, the reason for those things is, especially the no windows, we want to make sure that we are structuring that environment. Does everybody remember Little Black Sambo? Okay. The interesting thing about pieces like this is that almost all of the old cartoons are now being reintroduced. And so, and now they have better quality. You can get them on DVDs and the like, and they're in some ways worse. Mickey Mouse, again, a kind of a mainstream object. The current facility is organized by caricatures. And we have like the Mammy, the Sambo, the Coon, these kind of traditional caricatures. There are no racial or ethnic groups in the United States that have not been caricatured. In the case of African Americans and women, they've probably been caricatured in more ways and in many different ways, or different ways compared to other groups. Here you'd have what I'd call the kind of a brute caricature, the idea of this kind of menacing African American male. It's a fascinating history. We don't have time to do it now, but at one time in America's history, you could not find the caricature of African Americans as brutes. And after Reconstruction, that caricature took off as kind of a expression of white fears of what would happen if you allowed blacks to be free. And of course, now I'd make the argument that one of the dominant images of young African American males in popular culture is this image of the menace, the brute. That's from 1896. A student actually gave me this. Their grandparent didn't want it anymore, and they gave it to me. And it's a vicious and vile layering of stereotypes. It's been reproduced constantly. I'm going to tell you something here that you've probably heard me say if you watch the video, and that is that we have 5,000 plus objects. Every one of them is being sold today, and they're not being sold by me. If you go to eBay or Yahoo or any of the internet auction houses, you can buy almost any of those objects. I could recreate that entire, I'm not offering this, by the way, but I could recreate that entire museum at this university in 6 months, and that would not, it probably wouldn't take me that long. So these objects are still being sold. And more importantly, many of these objects, if not all of them, are still being made in some form. That, by the way, I just purchased this. That is actually a CD version of the old book. That's one of the first examples of that Coon Chicken Inn restaurant I was talking about. It actually got a little fancier and larger. In the museum, and this is one of the things, if you're going to use racist objects or sexist objects or hateful objects, it has to be done in a context of, I mean, not just to say structure means nothing. I mean, you have to have someone there who can talk to people in a meaningful way about the history of racism, sexism, and the like, but also talk about the political climate and the social climate. And it's got to be a long conversation. We cannot treat racial objects as if they were just dolls or ashtrays or whatever. It has to be done in the context of a deep conversation. Oh, I could tell you a story about this, and I'll tell you really quickly. If people ask me, have I lost my mind at any time buying this material, gotten angry? And there's 3 times I've been angry in the 30 plus years I've been collecting. And once was in LaPorte, Indiana, when I purchased this piece, and I bought this from the clerk, and she wrote down black print. And I said to her, no, you write down what it says on the print. And she said, I'm just going to write black print. And I go, no, if you're going to sell that to me, then write down the name that you have on it. And she said, sir, I don't want a problem. And it just got really ugly and goofy. Now, most of the time, and if you've purchased 5,000 plus objects, you learn how to do it. You buy the object, and then you just get out of there without, you learn not to have it. But I felt so bad about that. Years later, I went back to LaPorte, Indiana. I was actually going to apologize to her because she was just a clerk doing her job, but the store had closed. But anyway, that was one of those pieces that just upset me. Again, everyday objects. Now, one of the things we're doing, and I tell you, this feels so much better, is we are purchasing civil rights memorabilia and positive images. And what I realized is that, and actually someone, I forget who it was, but someone from another museum said that if you only show objects that defame the group, and you do not show objects that show the group responding in a vigilant, brave, or courageous way to that, then it just seems like they're passive victims. And that just resonated with me and started with me probably I would say the last 3 or 4 years. I've just been on this obsessive collecting of objects that are more positive. And this would be one of those pieces. But then again, you just can't get past new pieces being created. This right here is, just bought this the other day, ghetto bras. Every vile, vulgar stereotype of African Americans that you can think is in this. This is a mask, again, a brand new object each Halloween. Places like Halloween USA, Party, what's it called? Party US, Party, whatever. What is it called?
Party City.
Party City. They, from September 15th through November the 1st, they sell masks. And of course, a lot of them are ugly and scary, but the ones that depict peoples of color or poor people, they become monstrous because their features are exaggerated. This is actually from a website. I think it's called www.slapthathoe.net. And this black guy who is grotesquely caricatured, he slaps a white blonde woman, and she responds to his slapping by saying it was, by cursing him or whatever. Like, I don't want to repeat this stuff, okay, but it's pretty bad. And you know what it reminded me of was the most recent election, senatorial election in Tennessee, where with Harold Ford, where you had the blonde woman being used. It was just taking that to an extreme, as it were. This is a T-shirt. Again, a new object. Like I said, I made a mistake calling it the Jim Crow Museum. You know, we have at least 2,000 objects, probably more than that are from that period. But I just thought it was important that we continue to collect newer objects. And I learned something, which was if you don't have objects that resonate and are relevant to young people, they're going to tune you out. Also, to do an objective critique of what I'm doing requires that I demonstrate when the situation has or has not improved. He's already talked about hateful things. I'll show you a couple of those images. By the way, I think hateful things right now, I'm trying to figure out, it's at Mott Community College. The usual signs. This was kind of interesting. In Howell, Michigan, there was I don't know how many of you know this, there was an auctioneer who put up a Klan robe in his window. Did you hear about this story? And right across the street from him was a Hispanic American who had just been elected director of the Livingston County Diversity Group. And he's looking at that every day. And so he gets angry and gets his group together and says, well, we got a guy selling a Klan robe right across the street. Let's buy the Klan robe and burn it. And that made the newspapers. And of course, the Ann Arbor newspaper picks it up and all these other newspapers. Well, we picked it up too. So we called him and says, hey, don't burn the robes. The other side burns stuff. Don't you do that too. And instead, just give it to us. We have a home for it. So then he gets in the newspaper and says, we're not going to burn it. We're going to give it to the Jim Crow Museum. Well, the local Klan organizations decide, well, that's not good. We'd rather have it than they have it. And it got bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And that was the most surreal night of my life, and I'm including my wedding night. And I was, okay, anyway, so I got there, and we got there 3 hours early, and the place only there were only supposed to be 100 people in there, and it already started filling up. It was an old building. The auctioneer was getting his 15 minutes of fame, and I came there with a friend, and it was just two of us, and I'm sitting in there, and I'm surrounded, and I mean that term literally and metaphorically. The night we were 2-3 hours early, so for 2 or 3 hours we got to hear the auctioneer. A couple things I remember. He got up one time and he says, oh, they're having a parade outside, the anti-Klan demonstrators. We're having a parade outside. Let's show them how to have a real parade. Geez, I wonder what that's referencing. Then there was a group from Michigan State, some students who came in. They came barging in and shouting and screaming. And we probably had 5 or 6 kids dressed in polo shirts, whatever, jump on top of chairs and do the Hitler salute. And then the police are across the street because they don't want to make the situation worse by actually servicing. And that was a joke. And then the group gets, the anti-Klan groups gets pushed out. They're partitioned off from another group. They're yelling and screaming at each other. And I'm thinking to myself, what the hell am I doing in this room? I already have a Klan robe. I don't need another Klan robe. So anyway, we stayed and all, and it was one of those nights in my life. After it was over, we bought a woman's robe. They ended up selling like 14 Klan robes, and the stuff went for 100 times more than what it should have gone for. And I told Kevin, the guy with me, I said, listen, let's get the robe and get out of here. I'm not spending the night in Howell tonight, because we had a hotel we'd already paid for. I said, they can keep the money. I won't sleep in that bed tonight. Let's get out of here. And on our way out of town, the group that invited us says, well, they want you to come out of the church and just talk for a minute. I was like, I need to go home. And they said, no, you go. And I went by there, and it was very interesting because you have moments when you deal with racial stuff. And I mean, I'm in racial, whereas most Americans are trying not to talk about race, I'm talking about race virtually all day, every day, all day long. I get tired too. And so I'm like, okay, fine. And I go by there, and I remember 2 things. One, they were watching the movie Not in Our Town. Are you familiar with that? Not in Our Town? Anyhow. And there were a group of people in there, and they were praying and doing some things like that. And I looked in the corner, and there were two children playing. And one was black and one was white, and they were playing checkers. And I just started crying. And I just could not stop crying. Just could not stop crying. And then they said, okay, they want you to talk. So I cried through that. I told that whole story because we then made them a promise that we would come back to Howell and that we would turn their old opera house into an exhibit of our stuff. And so we took, oh, good Lord. The walls hadn't been painted in years. There were rat nests. There were all kind of things. It was, you complain, you people in these fancy museums, you complain and shut up with that. This place had stuff all, it took us days of scrub. This was old school. And when it was done, that was just like one part of one wall. When it was done and people came out, and again, we had structure, which is just critical, where we had to have discussions before. We had where people could ask their questions. Why do you do this? What are you? Aren't you just building a shrine? Aren't you just some self-loathing person? Don't you? I mean, just ask them all. Just get them all out, and then have that discussion, and then open it up, kind of a more broad way or broader way. I think that was good the way that was done. By the way, that target right there is an actual target that people used to use to shoot. And if you go to the internet now and you just type in running nigga target, you'll pull up cases where the FBI at an FBI picnic or a police department in some place where someone thought it was funny to use that target as a shooting game. And we were able to purchase one of those. Well, I believe what Dr. King said. And that's the other thing. I see a lot of the exhibits, and we spend so much time talking about stories and themes and whatever else. Well, get a credo that's consistent with your mission. Well, for us is this simple sentence from Dr. King: injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. And what that has really meant is that if I'm going to travel the country talking about I'm opposed to racism, I'm opposed to sexism, I'm opposed whatever, then I have to be opposed to injustice in general. And so I started collecting objects that defamed other groups. Again, everyday objects. This is actually from a website called www.tshirthell.com. And I got to tell you this. I have too many stories. But this one on the left, the one with the black kid, that is similar in some ways to Mr. Bennett's comment about if you wanted to, theoretically, if you wanted to eliminate crime, you could just abort all black babies. Of course, he could have gone, anybody know what I'm talking about, Mr. Bennett? Of course, he could have gone farther and just said, if you want to eliminate all crime, just eliminate all babies, which would have been even more ridiculous. But that T-shirt existed a couple years before he said that, but that existed, what he said existed as a popular culture joke decades ago, okay? Now, I bought the T-shirt because I've learned my lesson, buy the thing first, then have the conversation. I bought the T-shirt, and then I called the guy on the phone who runs that company, and I said, you got some funky stuff there. I mean, it's just brutally mean-spirited stuff, and you're making money. Good for you. It's American capitalism. But you seem so creative. Why you got to do it? And we got to talk. He says, don't worry about it. We're going to come out with the other T-shirt. And I was like, that doesn't even make stupid sense. I mean, anyone who thinks that the way you fight hatred is with more hatred is just not thinking, What I've come to see is that the way we treat poor whites in our culture parallels in some ways the way we treat racial groups. Well, we have this kind of, at least a dichotomy. I think in the case of poor whites, we have this image of like the virtuous, patriotic, the Waltons. And then we have this other idea, poor white trash, rednecks, kind of like Deliverance, So we started collecting those. Those were part of the other group. I told one of my friends I was going to collect the material for the Women's Museum, and he said to me, and it was such a profound question, he said, where would you start? I mean, isn't that a profound question? I mean, it's so much of it. I mean, where would you start? Sears, Myers, just stores, I guess. Yeah, lynching pieces are problematic for me. Brad, since I've, what do they call you here? Dr. Taylor or Professor Taylor? Okay, Brad, since I've been here, well, I have to thank him for inviting me here and for coming to Ferris. But since you've been at Ferris, we've had a meeting of minds about a certain thing. You know, we had a piece of a person. And I had decided that because oftentimes at lynchings, people they would take souvenirs, and sometimes the souvenirs were just photographs, and you see those on eBay going for $400, $500, $600. Lynching postcards. Alan created that Without Sanctuary exhibit with those postcards mainly. Well, we have what he has, but we also have a piece of a person. And I spent a lot of years talking to public museums about having parts of indigenous people in their museums. And of course, in our country, if you know America's history, you know that we used to stuff people. And I'm just saying what it is. And put them in museums. Well, I never wanted or thought we needed to do that. But because I thought you could do it in other ways. Again, all I'm trying to do is to get people talking deeply about what's going on. But after a while, I start seeing that I was doing what other people were doing in terms of not being open and honest with our collection with people. And so when we move into the new facility, and we'll do it a certain way, but when we move into the new facility, we're going to display that material. And that's been a source of quite a bit of debate at the school. These are some of the images that we have. You've probably seen some of these. This is actually Michael Donnell. He was killed in my hometown, Mobile, Alabama. I think that was in 1981. So we finally get to the point where we get the fancy museum words. I don't know, has anybody helped design a museum before? Have you talked to like a museum designer? Man, I don't want to advocate violence against other humans, but it'll just make you bang your head against the wall. You just want to take a pencil and stab yourself in the ear, because it's like after 6 months, you're still talking about a theme. Oh my goodness, Brad, I hope you're not doing that here. You know, and then the theme you come up with, it's the one you started with 6 months before. So we're debating storylines and themes and experiences and deconstructing and reconstructing. I'm like, dude, just tell the story. Okay, fine. I'll come up with 6 stories. We'll tell the stories. And I do admit this, though. I always thought the pieces could tell their own story, and every time one of us talked, we were talking over them, if that makes sense. And so that's been kind of a personal struggle for me. In our current facility, we don't have a single didactic panel, not one explaining anything. The way I could reconcile that in myself was we created the website with essays explaining all this stuff. But there are no didactic panels. I realize now that has to change. But, well, I'll give you this quick, and then I'm almost done. This quick story. There was and it's in the essay, one of the essays I wrote. There was an elderly black woman, and who had been collecting this stuff for years. And like Stetson Kennedy, she didn't throw stuff away, and she ran around collecting it. And people were more than happy to give it to her. And for months, once I found her, for months, I visited her, and I joked with her. She joked with me that we were courting. We weren't. But I went back, and when she found out I was from Mobile and down home, we got to be good friends and everything. And she would not let me see her collection. Just refused. She says, you can't see it. And I said, why? Why? We're basically courting. You only got me by 65 years. I mean, come on, we're friends, we're whatever. And we're eating together and talking and enjoying life. Let me see it, please. I'm not going to want it. I promise you, I'm not going to want it. And like in a real courtship, lying. See, that's one of those inappropriate things I have to learn how not to say. So finally one day, I wore her down and she says, she just called me Little David. She says, Little David, I'm gonna let you see it. And so she had this huge antique store. It was a house, but it was an antique store. And she took me in the back of it. And my Lord, from ceiling to floor, just shells, every conceivable misrepresentation, every grotesque, the sadness that I felt was so thick that it stunned me literally. And I wanted everything in there. I wanted it all. She was right. I wanted. And I remember thinking to myself, this feeling I'm having, I want other people to have something similar to this, but I don't want it to stop at that feeling. Because in and of itself, that's not even cathartic. It can't just be this feeling. It has to move beyond that. It has to move then to some kind of catharsis, and then it has to move beyond the kind of reflective sadness into something positive. And that's what I thought. So the new place we're going to create, when you first walk in, we're going to do the whole blackface thing. If you ever watched the movie Bamboozle, I think there's like 7 of us that watched that movie, and I'm counting Spike Lee in that. And that's the movie I would have made had I made a movie, by the way. I thought the ending was terrible. It was just, he just got tired. It's like, kill somebody. You know, I mean, just it's like in bad fiction writing. I don't know what to do with him, shoot him. But anyway, the one scene in that movie I liked was when he showed the guy putting the blackface on. That was so historically accurate. We're trying to negotiate with them to get that. But what we're going to do is we have the old minstrel tables. We got all the minstrel stuff, and you set up. That's going to be the first thing people walk in. And by the way, the floor is also going to tell a story. And on the floor, it's going to say, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are what? Created equal. That's going to be on the floor. You look down, that's what you see. And then you walk in and you see that. And then there's another piece I'm not showing you, but it's over there. But then there's going to be a piece about all the Jim Crow laws and Jim Crow segregation. In other words, this is what I'm saying, Brad, and this is the difficult part. How to contextualize something by recontextualizing it. Does that make sense at all? In other words, put it in a context, but then move it out. Okay, whatever. Then after the Jim Crow laws, we have to show the relationship between Jim Crow and violence. That's going to be hard for people. That's that guy's face. We want people to walk in through it. What I did, I helped a little bit with the Wright Museum's exhibit. Has anyone been to the Wright Museum lately? If you've been there lately, you've seen the two rooms that deal with the stuff we deal with. This is what we tried to do there is create this kind of movement of people on a journey where they can see that things got better or whatever. So anyway, you walk through the Coon Chicken Inn just the way people in the past would have walked through the restaurant. And then you have like the mammy jars and all. Then this whole display on Little Black Sambo. And if you notice here, on the side over here would be Helen Bannerman's first Little Black Sambo. And then finally you see the American version of it with the umbrella at the bottom with the tiger. And then you see kind of the newer versions. And then finally over to the end, what you see is realistic depictions of African Americans. That's one of the major mistakes that I made. And again, I had a small space. But you have to show realistic images, everyday images of the people that are being defamed. And so when I create a space that deals with the defaming of women, I'll show the caricatured images, the spinster, the hag, the whore. I'll show that imagery. But then I'll also show women reading and talking, just being women. That was a huge mistake that I made in the first facility. I will not make that mistake this time. The other mistake I made, again, was not showing the response to Jim Crow. And so we've been collecting all kind of... I'll tell you a cool piece I just collected. In 1964, Lyndon Baines Johnson signed the most comprehensive civil rights bill of all time. I got the pen he used to sign that. Isn't that cool? Yeah, bought it. Bought it for cheap too. It was good. So I not only got it for a good price. And I even have him scribbling on the side of it, Civil Rights Bill, LBJ on the side of it. So that's cool. And then finally, in every space that deals with objects that defame people, you must have an adjoining space, not a separate room, an adjoining space where people can talk and hear about positive things that are going on. That's going to be a 10-foot tall mural. And people are going to sit there on the mural. And those people on that mural, for us, the reason we chose them is because they are, and that drawing's not right yet, but they are black people, brown people, red people, yellow people. Am I missing somebody? White people, black people, brown people, yellow people, red people, different colored people who died for civil rights. So that much in the kind of a biblical sense of the cloud of witnesses, we have the people sit there as we discuss where we need to go today. Yeah, we can talk about mistakes when you ask me questions. Always end with a picture of her. What I did was I took a niece and superimposed it over an old drawing because I have to remind myself always that it's about what's positive. So we'll end with her. All right, I'll take your questions. Well, it was a pleasure being. Just joking. Yes.
So in the beginning, you were starting this with your own money, I'm guessing. How is the museum being funded now, and are you going to donate your collection to the museum?
Yeah, I already donated it to them. Again, I don't want to say this was a mistake, but at the time I gave it to them, it was probably valued at about $200,000. And I could use that money now, and I am not joking. I'm driving a Hyundai Sonata, okay, and it's 10 years old, or whatever year they first came out. Anyway, no, I gave it to them. I never had any intention of selling it or doing anything else. The biggest collectors of this stuff are people who buy it to resell it, and that was always a big deal with me, that I'm going to donate it to a university. And so what I said to the university was, you have to promise me that it will be preserved, you have to promise me that it will be displayed, and you have to promise me that that you will then start giving me money to buy new stuff. If either of those three things ever stop, you have to give my collection back with the other stuff. So we haven't had a problem so far. But yeah, I spent every dime I had for many years on the collection. It was just, I don't know, have you ever known an obsessive collector? I've met a lot of them in my life, and they're all like that,
And what about funding now?
Funding now, of course, we are not the flagship institution in the state, which means that it's harder for us to raise money. And we do not have a history of raising money either. That's the other piece. What we have, and it's been that we've had faculty and staff and others who've just been generous. The dean of our library gave me $20,000 and said, if you see some stuff you want, go buy it. And I said, thank you. Thank you. That's just wonderful. I've had other people give me $10,000, $5,000. And of course, these days, I have people just giving me their objects. Had a person out in California who just donated, and I don't do it anymore. I used to praise objects. But, I'm looking at it, it would have been $50,000 worth of stuff, and gave it to us. I think the thing is, people have always given this stuff to museums, but then it ends up in a storage room somewhere. Whereas with us, they know it's going to be shown and displayed and used to talk about race. Again, it's a means to an end. We don't show it just to show it. We're trying to hold discussions. And so as that word gets out, we get more and more people donating. After that Klan rope situation down there, we actually had probably, I don't want to exaggerate, I think we had 2 or 3 people give complete robes to the museum. We also had another 100 trying to sell us robes. So yeah, that's where, yes.
Where and when will the new museum be?
As soon as I come up with the remaining $700,000, we already got a space located. We just finished designing Tuesday. So now it's in the hands of Exhibit Works, putting it all together. I really believe it'll be a destination place where people will come from all over the country to not just to look at the objects, but to hold the kind of conversations that we're holding. And I'll tell you a secret, although this is being televised, I probably shouldn't say this. The day after we move in, the next day I'm taking all the stuff on women and putting it into the small room we're in. And then the day after that, I'm gonna get in the newspaper and say, this room is too small. You know, I need a bigger room for that.
Just some big rappers all
Mhm. The value of the internet, you can do a lot more damage with the internet, but you can also do a lot more good than you used to. And the advantage of the internet is that you can be located anywhere. I will tell you this, Brad. Many people just assume when I travel the country speaking that I'm at the University of Michigan. And always introduce me as University of Michigan. And of course, as an Ohio State graduate, that's problematic. But beyond that, it's just the assumption that if it's something creative and new, it must be from the flagship institution. Well, you don't have to be from the flagship institution to do something like that. And with the internet, you can have an internet presence. Our website has actually had 2 million visitors. We've only had 500,000 counted on the one page because they don't all go to this other page, but we have a way of figuring out who goes where with the internet traffic with the campus webmaster. 2 million visitors to this little website. I mean, that's a lot, you know, which means that, you know, I get emails, Norway, Japan, you know, we're now working with people on their dissertations and the like. That's how I envision this, as this place where people can come and talk about race, where we're hosting conferences about race and how to handle the material. I don't think there's a museum, certainly not one of the top drawer museums, in any city that does not have racist memorabilia. And most of them keep it downstairs and they won't show it. And you know why, I get that. I mean, they are donor dependent and worried about offending someone. And it only takes, I'll cut to the chase with here, it only takes one black person with some influence or the perception that they have some influence to keep that museum from showing that stuff. And that's a shame. That's a shame. I mean, we got too many people into this happy history piece. You know, it's okay to talk about history as long as we're talking about, you know, accomplishments or whatever. But history is all of what happened. And like Abraham Lincoln said, we cannot escape history. Yes?
You mentioned that the name of the museum.
Was a mistake?
Yeah, do you think you might change it at this opportunity?
Yeah, you know what? That's been one of the things we've been discussing, but it's sort of like stationary in a way that, you know, it becomes kind of your identity. And I tell you, we have, this one, it's not quite resolved yet because it is building the new museum is actually a mulligan in some ways. You know, it's like, okay, we get to put over, but I think we're wed to that. So I think we're going to end up being something like, we're the Jim Crow Museum, but, you know, so 100 years from now, yeah, it'll always be, you know, the entree, as it were. That'll be the major portion of the collection. But as new stuff comes out, I mean, there's new stuff coming. I just bought something. Can someone hand me that T-shirt? Because it would require. Do you mind if I move? Look at you. You know me 5 minutes and you're telling me what to do? The cameraman. See, I just bought this today. And now again, a piece doesn't have to be racist to be in the museum. It just has to be about race and something to get us talking. And so I bought this. I don't know, can everyone see that? You know, I just gave a talk the other day about this whole pimpification of American culture. And it's one of my pet peeves, and I have a lot of ideas about how that happened and everything. But anyway, what I'm noticing is there are more and more images in our culture about, you know, associating black life almost as a synonym for pimp life and prison culture. And again, it even has that smell, that cheap, brand new smell. Why? Because it's brand new. Well, I'm buying stuff constantly, just constantly. And the thing about African Americans, as opposed to some of the other groups, not only do we have the old traditional stereotypes, but we just keep getting new ones and new caricatured images all the time. So somebody's got to keep the markers. Couple more? Yes. Give me some hard questions.
I don't have a hard question. I was just curious about whether you collected racist memorabilia from international, from other countries.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. At one time, a disproportionate amount of what we had came from what's called occupied Japan, you know, 1940s. Today, and I still get some stuff. Whenever people go overseas, I always tell them, buy me something. But today we're picking up a lot of objects from Central America, South America, and also from Asia. From the Netherlands, you know, Black Peat, the whole Black Peat thing, we got a couple pieces from that. Canada, boy, you know, we're getting a lot of stuff from Canada. So the answer to that question is yes. I was really surprised, though, in the case of Central America and South America, the images of African Americans are probably more vile and vulgar than the current ones that are being produced here. They are old school images. And so the answer to that question is yes. And by the way, the only other group that's true of is women, that we also can find items that defame women in every culture. So, you know, I went to New Orleans about 10 years ago. It's not New Orleans, by the way. I went to New Orleans about 10 years ago, and I couldn't find any objects that defame African American people. And of course, the collector part of me is like, dang. But the civil rights humanistic sociologist part of me is like, yeah, you know, I'm singing a theme song from the Jeffersons, you know. And so you'll get it. So anyway, the thing is I go back there, and this was just before Katrina. I went back there, and in just a few years' time, maybe 6 years' time or whatever, 7 years' time, all the stores had all these objects. Now, a lot of them were picked in the so-called West Indian African or African descendant, but just vulgar stereotypes. You know, the big penis, the big, you know, the really 1920s type stuff. And it was everywhere. And what was really interesting was that almost all the stores, the people working in the stores were first-generation Americans. I know this because I asked them. And I've always found that an interesting dynamic, that a person comes to a country, and they're just trying to make a living, come to a country and they sell material that's defaming a group that's been here, been defamed for 2 centuries or so. You know, here's quickly, when I buy shirts, the people always ask, what do they ask me? I buy these horrible shirts, and they say, well, what size are you? And I always say, it doesn't matter. Just give me one. And that makes no sense in their world, because they've made their peace with that object, you know what I mean? And the idea that I'm going to do something other than wear it doesn't even occur to them. So I go, it doesn't matter, small, large, extra large, I don't care. They're like, yeah, but what size are you? Okay, I just thought I'd throw that out. Yes, sir.
Sound. Is sound memorabilia a part of the museum? And, you know, with this pronounced invasion of rap culture that talks on the negative side and so forth, is that?
Yeah, we have the new museum. We'll be able to do that, and that's a wonderful question, because sound, we lack sound now. We only have a few pieces where we have an alligator. When you open his mouth, it goes, them shoulders, you know, like that. Well, we have lots of old 78s. We have lots of, what is it, 38s? Is it 35, 38s? 33s, okay. So we have 78s, 33s, 45s. So and there was a lot of racist Johnny Ray type music. But there's also music like from Billie Holiday, like singing Strange Fruit, which, by the way, will be the room theme for the violence piece. Well, now I got to start over. Tell them everything. Okay, but do this when you're talking to them too. So so we are gonna have that, but also a lot of those old songs have been, you know, redone, and so I can go to I was buying Johnny Ray up the 33s. I was buying those one at a time. Now I go to Stormfront or some of these other websites, and I can just buy the whole collection for $9.95 or whatever. So it's actually much easier for me. But I do think sound matters, so we're going to use musical sound, but we're also going to have cartoons and videos and speeches, and yes, we're going to use a lot of sound, including, in the new museum, we'll have a section on modern pieces. I think the most powerful part of the new museum will be racist objects created since 2000. And what I think the first thing people are going to look at that, and they're going to think, well, they look a lot like the ones created 75 years ago. So yes, we do plan on doing the whole sound piece. The trick is, see, I don't like to manipulate people, and I don't mean manipulate in the bad sense, but I just always wanted the objects to speak for themselves and try to stay out of the way. And I started thinking that when I start using other like audio-visual things. And I'm telling people what to think and I'm telling people what to believe. Now, there's a way I wish everybody felt, but they don't all feel that way. But I wish, I recognize now that I have to, a part of the context is using some of that other stuff. I had a chance to meet the rabbi who was the inspiration behind the Holocaust Memorial Center in Detroit. And boy, I tell you, that was a great meeting. But anyway, when you get to that last room in the Holocaust Center, of course, now you're going to know this, you know. When you get to the last room in Holocaust Center, they do a little thing with the floor, you know. And I said to him, I'm not trying to be funny, but wasn't that floor moving a little bit? And he's like, yeah, just a little bit. And then they do something with the sound where they play 4 huge videos at the same time with the sounds all conflicting. And they're like, and it creates this kind of chaotic, uncomfortable feeling. And I said to him, you know, I know that works, but I tell you, and I'm not meaning this as a criticism, but I tell you what else would work. Just showing a child being hurt would also do it. It would for me. You know, when I show that alligator bait picture, I don't have to say anything. And sticking a didactic panel in front of that doesn't do a whole lot. It just doesn't. I mean, so yeah, we are going to use sound. Yes?
Have you had in the past any visits from racist groups, or do you anticipate that as a problem in the future?
By racist, you mean with a kind of ideological and they have a card?
Yeah.
As opposed to just holding racial views?
I guess more formally organized.
Not that I know of. I expect that will happen once we move into the new facility. And what they can do is wait until we'll have hourly tours, wait and have an hourly tour, and then you come in there, you'll be respectful, and you'll be welcome to participate in a dialogue. I mean, they are Americans, so we'll sit and we'll talk in dialogue. And what I want is, and I met with any number of ideological groups in my life to talk to them, skinheads, Klans groups, any number of other groups, posse members, and you know, they have a way of seeing the world, and I have a way of seeing the world, and sometimes you can talk to people. But if they're in that place, they're going to be like everybody else is, which is respectful. And as long as there's dialogue going on, then that's fine. But you know, I have lots of people that come in here and they think like, especially when they first hear the idea, why did you do this? And why is this necessary in the year 2007? And of course, it'd be easy for me to say everything's being remade, which is true, and we still have racial problems, which is true and all. But you really have to experience it. And again, that's where the dialogue come in. And it can't be a single docent. I mean, that's what I mean. We focus so much on groups and on just sitting down, let's, you know, again, we have the advantage of having a classroom right next to us. See, Brad, I didn't force you guys to go through this. We have a classroom right next door, and so we turn the seats around and we talk. We talk. And if you're just wanting, if you're just bored and had nothing else to do that day and thought you'd come by and have a little uneven fun, it's not going to end up being like that. You know, what you're going to end up having is the conversation about race we should all be having. So if you think all black people are pigs, okay, let's talk about that. You know, I mean, we don't have topics that are verbal. See, I don't think most museums have PhDs on staff. Now, I don't think just because you have a PhD, you know what you're talking about. As a matter of fact, sometimes it's a detriment. But what I mean is they don't have people whose expertise is academically the thing that they're talking about. I don't mean that to say, I should have kept that. Erase that tape. Just change that whole part. We have the advantage of having historians there and having psychologists there and having sociologists there. And we can bring them all in the room and sit and talk. And it doesn't feel like brainwashing. It doesn't feel like propaganda because most of them have the kind of easy talking style that I do, which is we just want to talk about this. I mean, if you think that blacks are inherently inferior or women are inherently, why? Why do you think that? When did you first feel that way? You know? And what happens when you travel the country and you meet white Americans who like, let me ask you this. How many of you in here have met a white person in a job they shouldn't have? They just didn't do it well. Okay? It happens, right? But the difference is that when we meet the white person in a job, we don't assume it has anything to do with their race. You know? So why is it we think that with the, and that's what we just talk. We just talk. And what does this object mean to you? There was a famous soccer announcer in Ron Atkinson in England, and he didn't know the microphone was still going, and his team had just lost. And he said, in reference, I'm not going to repeat the whole thing, but in reference to one of the black players, he says, now that's what in old days we would have referred to as a lazy effing nigga. And it went out all over the world. It went to every country but America, because we don't watch soccer. And 2 minutes later, the most famous announcer in Europe, his life has changed. Someone from the BBC got the idea that they should bring him because he needed diversity training. And we don't do diversity training. We're on a journey of understanding. That's different. We're not trying to make money. It's not a corporation. And they got the big idea to bring him to the United States and let him sit down and talk to me about race. And I said, man, why would he want to do that? And they were like, well, probably to save his job. I said, well, that doesn't make sense to me. I would like to talk to you guys about race, him about race, everybody about race. But why would he subject himself to that? Especially because he probably thinks it's going to be horrible. And they says, no, listen to you, he thinks you're okay. I said, okay, fine, but don't film it. Let it just be a private conversation between the two of us. And so he came to the United States, and we sat down and we talked. And then he said to me, could you just get on the film and say what you thought? I says, well, what I would say is that in terms of understanding race, you're not that far along. And he says, well, say that. Yes.
David, since we like to end on a positive note here too, I want to ask you to give us to talk a little bit about the positive impact that having this particular museum has made on your campus at Ferris State.
On campus, well, it has brought us obviously some attention, and I think that what we've been able to do, and we have racial problems. We have the usual problems with the student newspaper when they decide that they want to do some racial satire, which is almost always a bad idea. We have, a population that is almost, the African Americans and Hispanics are from cities, and the European Americans are from suburbs or rural areas, and so they have some of those issues going. What it has been for us is at least one way that we can get kids sitting down, and not just them, get the teachers sitting down talking about race. And so it's become kind of a staple for us that, okay, we know that there's at least one place. And I think that in a way, it's starting to spread. We now had, last year we had some students, and it scared the daylights out of me. They built a tunnel of oppression, and just literally scared me because I didn't know what they were going to put in it, And they took all these horrible images of different groups being brutalized and all, and people would walk through the tunnel, and then they'd have discussions. So it has sparked a lot of conversation, a lot of good conversation. I think what it's also done, it's gotten a lot of our professors thinking about race in ways they hadn't before. I think we make a mistake when we assume that because a person has a PhD in economics or a PhD in physics, that they are smart about relations between groups. Sometimes they're not. Sometimes they're just smarter about their prejudices. So it has done that for us.
Didn't in fact this summer you mentioned to me that there is interest from a number of the faculty in receiving your docent training? So far we've had 30 faculty trained as docents. And now once we move into the new place, we're just gonna hire. See, a lot of things got to change. We're going to hire probably 3 people, one to just staff the place all the time, and 2 to kind of serve as docents constantly. And that's an interesting thing, Brad, because now the question will become, well, what do you do with the 30 people that you've trained to use the facility for their own students? And so that'll be a question we have to answer then. I would hope, though, that we always have volunteers who figure out, because we've had over 50 faculty members rewrite their syllabi to incorporate the museum into their, and these are not all in the social sciences. I mean, we have people in allied health. We have people in the College of Business. We have people in the College of Technology who have rewritten their syllabi to incorporate this
this resource into it. Yes, sir.
As a museum curator, do your chops lick at the recent news of this lady who's got these 40-year-old papers
Yeah.
left over from Martin?
Yeah. Yeah, the problem is so do the lips of practically every other person. I found when I'd often go to auctions, I'd end up sitting there and Frederick Meyer would be in the audience, and he's got more money than the devil. Although he himself is a wonderful, a beautiful man. At least my experience with him has just been great, and I say that with the hope that he'll write me that $700,000 check if he's listening. Anyway, but I end up usually bidding against a big museum or a benefactor of a museum, so I don't stand to get some of that. I think though once we're built, it'll be really easy at that point to get certain grants and because people like a winner. They like something that's already established, as it were. That's why I'm so confident I'll be able to do, for example, the Sarah Bartman room, because I know what not to do this time in terms of the many mistakes I made, but also I'll be able to use the kind of political cachet that I got from this. Because ultimately, I really want that whole house of tolerance that has objects in there that deal with poor whites and Asians and Mexicans and others. I mean, right now, there's some vicious things going on about the descendants of Mexicans in our country. And the real ironic piece of that is that they can say just as easily as any other group that they are Native Americans. I mean, it's San Jose, it's San Diego. It's not Millertown. I mean, they were the Californos and the Hispanos in Texas, and their descendants are being mistreated in our country. Well, I'd also like to have a facility that deals with that. We had a vice president once who says, "Where's this going to stop?" Your guess is as good as mine. Well, I'm sorry I went over, but what happens is once we start having a relaxed conversation, then we just don't know when to stop. So thank you for inviting me here.